Hi, I'm Chris Peters. I'm the Executive Director of the U.S. Partnership for Assured Electronics, and we're here today talking with Ethan Plotkin. Ethan is the CEO of GDCA, and we're talking about a topic that we're starting to see more of in the defense world, and that is this shift from obsolescence management to sustainment. Ethan, it's great to see you.
Hey, great to see you, Chris. Thanks for putting this together with me. So before we get into the conversation, though, I'd love to understand a little bit more about how you see the concept of assurance from USPAE, Partnership for Assured Electronics.
Sure. So for us, assured is really in two areas. One is the supplier. We're looking for trusted suppliers, whether that came about because they comply with certain standards or maybe they were referred to us by our own trusted supplier network. We want to make sure that we know who we're working with. And the second part of assurance is the product. We want to know the provenance of the product. Half a cent capacitor can bring down an entire system. So we want some traceability. We want to know where those components are coming from and are they from trusted sources. So that's kind of how we look at it.
Okay, well, I mean, that's good context setting, right? Because the way we look at assurance, and it's interesting, it's another aspect, but still assurance, is we're actually talking about assurance when it comes to longevity of supply. So assured life cycles.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
So then back on the issue of sustainment, there's a lot of confusion about this, and we hear a lot of different definitions. So for the sake of our conversation today, why don't you kind of set the stage? What do you see as the difference between obsolescence management and sustainment?
Okay, well, for sure. Thanks for that. So I think when I'm looking at obsolescence management versus sustainment, I think that the objective of each is different. All right. So obsolescence management is more about people aiming to solve an obsolescence issue, right? So specifically, they need to get parts right now. They can't get them because they're obsolete. So that's a problem. So that's what they want to solve. Whereas with sustainment mindset, people are aiming to put in place the capability to get parts for as long as they're needed. That's that assured availability piece that I was talking about. So whether that's 2 years or 20 years, that's the objective of sustainment. Now, sometimes obsolescence management and sustainment solutions, they're the same solution, like when you have a concrete end date with no chance of changing, but often that's not the case.
So 2 years or 20 years, we're talking about the defense industry. So we're also looking at 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, take the C-130, for example. So when you've got most of your weapon systems that are in this long period of sustainment, how does sustainment work in that kind of environment when it's drawn out for such a long period of time?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a good question. So, I think the C-130 is a really good example of a platform that just keeps going. Although the current C-130J has a lot more electronics in it than the original version had in the 1950s, over the years, the plane has gone through a lot of different flight and weapon systems upgrades. And that highlights, I think, the challenges that programs face in introducing necessary capability enhancements while sustaining subsystems that are functionally fit for purpose. So when I'm talking about sustainment, I'm talking about the platform, not only the platform, but I'm also kind of working on sustaining the systems that are on the platform themselves. So there's like a flight management system, mission control computers. Those are all unique, specific systems that all are in various different states of obsolescence and upgrade over time. So that goes to kind of working on the systems that help the platform achieve its mission. So I think there's one that is kind of near and dear to our heart at GDCA, and that's Phalanx. Phalanx, you may have seen this. This is the close-in weapon system. And it's for defense against incoming threats like small boats or surface torpedoes. It's mainly a Navy thing. And since 2007, my company, we've been supporting a configuration of the Phalanx that was introduced in the early 2000s, even though the platform's been in place since the 70s. And the way we've done that is it uses a Motorola single board computer. It's a circuit card assembly that was discontinued in 2005. And nearly 15 years later, even though it's an old design, it continues to be a mainstay weapon system for the Navy, and it's perfectly good. They don't necessarily need to upgrade it yet. So that's why they've needed this kind of longevity assurance for for phalanx in the face of kind of obsolescence. And this is the type of unanticipated ongoing demand, and it's not just isolated to defense systems, right? So, for example, back in '08, we became a second source of supply for a different, happened to be Motorola single board computer for a medical device, which was a blood gas analyzer for a large Austrian medical device manufacturer. And at that time, they thought they needed just like one more production run of cards because they had a new version of the device that was due out in production pretty soon. But what it turned out to be is that the expected lifetime of that device, which they thought was going to be 3 years, turned into closer to 10 years. And so they ended up extending their assurance program with us 2 more times for the total of 10 years of support. And they were able to do that because we had an assurance program set up, a proactive life cycle support plan, if you will. And so that meant that we had good control of their projections and forecasts with them. If they had not had a plan in place, then they would not have been able to extend it. They would not have been in a position. So I think that that's a critical piece for sustainment, is to have a plan. Whereas with obsolescence management, you don't necessarily need to have a life cycle plan. You just need to know how many you need right now.
So what I'm hearing is that the goals for sustainment are significantly different. And it seems like obsolescence management is more short-term, whereas sustainment is more long-term. So help me understand why that's important.
Well, you know, I mean, on its face, the answer to that might seem obvious, right? Because doesn't everyone want to ensure like lifetime readiness of a system, right? Long term, right? But you know, it's actually, I think, a really incisive and insightful question, right? And that the reality is that many people, both USG and also DIB people and people outside of USG, you know, they have immediate term objectives, right? They want to get this material now, and it's not necessarily their job to ensure those objectives in 5 years, right? You know, my job as a procurement person is to get this part. It's not to make sure that I can get this part in 5 years. So, and that's exactly why we continue to find ourselves with these DMSMS issues over and over again. So the reason we're scrambling now is because someone didn't have a sustainment mindset, or it wasn't in their job description early on. But what if they did have that sustainment mindset?
I work a lot with acquisition professionals, and I can tell you that that's typically not in their metrics, is looking at long term. It's more short term. So if it's outside their pay grade or their responsibility, whose job is it to look at these things for the long term?
Yeah, I mean, I think strictly speaking, looking at this stuff for the long term, it's down to, for defense programs, the product support manager. Okay, they're the person who is tasked from the program manager to make sure that they can get through all their DMSMS issues and maintain material readiness and all that. And any PSM, though, they're going to tell you that they can't do anything without 2 main things. They need top level cover from their leadership team, and they need their team that is reporting into them. I call it back cover, but I got your back, boss, right? That's what they need. And I think this is the key insight that unlocks the power of sustainment mindset for DMSMS practitioners. I think the folks who are in the trenches facing DMSMS issues every day, if they can understand what their boss's boss wants, right? In this case, it's either the program executive office or Pentagon brass or Congress or whoever, then you can provide information your boss needs to sell a solution to leadership. And that's why I think the sustainment concept is so incredibly empowering, because it's exactly what the top leadership wants, right? They want innovative and informed solutions that deliver predictable and affordable readiness, right? So that I think is really helpful for practitioners to really understand kind of what solutions and what options will really appeal to their boss, their product support manager. So the next thing I kind of think of is, okay, so how can practitioners with this insight show their PSMs that they've got their backs, right? Well, I think the first thing that they can do is they can really start by talking to their PSM about the idea of sustainment as an innovative mindset. and draw a straight line between what top leadership wants and the approach you as the practitioner want to take in proactively preventing DMSMS issues instead of reacting to an endless cycle of obsolescence issues. So, for
And I'm
example,
sorry, Ethan, let me interrupt for a second. When you say practitioner, who exactly are you referring to?
I think I'm talking about engineers, I'm talking about logisticians. They could be in the program, but they could also be sustainment level folks at the depot, so outside of the
Okay.
program. So that's who I'm talking about when I say practitioners. Everybody who can't sign off on a purchase order request for a last time buy or reverse engineer, right?
Okay.
So I think that, and so those practitioners, I think there's a wealth of information out there about what top leadership wants. So I know, for example, Ellen Lord, the Undersecretary for Defensive Acquisition and Sustainment, right? We know her all, I think, very well, has repeatedly stated that she wants predictable sustainment performance for DoD programs, right? And I think indeed these types of outcomes, it's about outcomes, you know, readiness outcomes. This is kind of a key feature in the new DoD instruction 5000-02 around the operation of the adaptive acquisition framework. So that big picture, I think, helps practitioners help their bosses, the PSMs, understand that, hey, what I'm talking about is not necessarily outside of what everybody's asking for. So once you kind of have that mindset with the PSM, then you can take the conversation to the next level.
Yeah.
And then they would be much more open to the idea that, you know, although a sustainment solution may cost a little bit more upfront, a little bit more, not always, the return on the investment is pretty fast and ends up being far better than reactive solutions.
Well, but that brings up a good point when you talk about cost, because you know this is common sense, and everybody wants more predictable sustainment, but it's challenging for a lot of people. They don't have the time, they don't have the money, they don't have the people. There are lots of different reasons why they're running into roadblocks, and so what happens is people throw up their hands, they stop trying. How do we overcome that? How do we address these kind of issues?
You know, I hear this all the time. You know, it kind of goes, you know, first, you know, we don't have the time to evaluate all the options available to us. I hear it. And I also hear it, you know, we don't have the money, right? You know, we don't have the money to buy every part we're going to need for 20 years. So we're just going to go for a 2-year solution or a 3-year solution. And we don't have the time to gather all the information either, right? Because there's the effort to gather the time, but then there's also the waiting, because, you know, you can't just kind of send a query off to a supplier and have them come back the next day with a really complex solution. It takes them quite a while to crunch the numbers. So I think that, and the reality is look, everybody, both in the government and outside, the resources are stretched thin at the best of times. And then when you add unforeseen DMSMS issues into the mix, you know, it really is a struggle just to keep their heads above water, you know. But I just continue going back to the reality that sustainment solutions don't cost as much as people think, and they're much cheaper in the long run. So for example, the cost of solving a problem, an obsolescence management DMSMS issue, is about the same whether you put in a permanent sustainment solution or whether it's a Band-Aid, right? There's an overhead to that. So the difference, though, is that when you have a sustainment mindset, you only have to solve the problem one time, right? You put a solution in that gives you the capability to get a part, right? In my case, it's electronics, but it could be electromechanical or mechanical assemblies. Whereas with an obsolescence management approach, you solve the problem for a couple of 2 or 3 years, and then in 3 years, you can't get the part again. And so now you have to go and solve the problem again. So I think that if programs, even anecdotally, right, and these are the conversations that I would encourage people to have with their leadership team, their PSMs, if they just step back and consider the amount of resources they spend reacting to DMSMS issues, they'd find that there's a lot of savings to be had if they just change the way they approach assuring the availability of material that goes into sustaining their weapon systems. And I'll just say one final piece on this. This is why I really advise program teams to make a business case to stand up a dedicated DMSMS management team whose goal is really about predicting and preventing and resolving DMSMS issues that gives program leadership confidence that they're not going to be hit with DMSMS surprises.
So, all right, let's say somebody's watching this and they buy into your story and they think, okay, that's good. And they start to understand that, well, maybe money isn't an issue. What's next? What are the next steps for them?
Well, I think three things mainly. I think that firstly, get up to speed with the resources that are out there. There are some great resources. Both OSD and the services have developed a lot of really good guidance to both set up DMSMS management teams, but also to actually perform DMSMS resolution work. And there's a lot in Defense Acquisition University around those resources. I think secondly, I would develop a sustainment strategy. Now, I've talked a little bit about how practitioners can align the work with their PSMs and what their PSM's bosses want. And I think this should give them space to present a side-by-side comparison between both sustainment and obsolescence management solutions. So that's kind of validates the strategy that, okay, we're going to try to put in permanent solutions versus Band-Aids. And then finally, I would say after you kind of have a sense of what the resources are out there, and then you have an idea of a sustainment strategy, then I think at that point, I would advise, call an expert, whether it's within the DoD or outside. There's a lot of people everywhere who've been around the block a bunch of times. And so I think as with anything, the devil's in the details. So I think that if you have an idea around what the pitfalls are, right, then you can save a lot of time and you don't have to kind of reinvent the wheel. So for example, if you want a worksheet, right, that helps you kind of do a side-by-side comparison between different electronic solutions, right, you can send me an email. So watch this space for new events and related sustainment resources and to basically deliver assurance for long-term availability of these defense systems.
Well, Ethan, this has been an interesting discussion. You and I and a lot of other people have been living through these issues, DMSMS and other issues for a long time, and it's been a challenge. It's been a real challenge for a lot of people, and I know that we're all looking for better solutions. So maybe the next time you and I get together, we can drill into some more concrete steps that people can take to address these issues, whether or not they have a dog in the background.
Sounds good. Well, it would not be a really...
whether or not they have a DMSMS team.
Yeah, for sure. Or a dog in the background. And it wouldn't
or a dog barking.
Wouldn't be a great interview unless we had some X factors.
It wouldn't be.
Well, that would be great, Chris. I would love to continue the conversation. Thanks so much for a fun discussion.
You're very welcome. Good talking to you.
Yeah, thank you. You take care.